It's no secret that in this new NIL landscape, Iowa State is in a disadvantaged position money-wise. But the good news is it might not be all as bad as we think.
You are Locked On Cyclones, your daily podcast on the Iowa State Cyclones, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, my name is Nick Marvitz, and this episode is brought to you by Mazda. Like our players, we're driven by the details. Highlights make the reel, but the work behind them makes it count. Stay tuned for this week's Moving the Game Forward, the all-new Mazda CX-5. More to move every side of you. Today, we're going to kind of be all over the place. We're going to start with the NIL situation. Brent Bloom, you probably know the name, was on a podcast, Three Beards Media, not Three Birds, Three Beards Media, and he had a few things to say, a couple stories to tell, and I'm going to tell you how I see the outlook of this going for Iowa State in the future. Then we're going to talk a little bit about some players visiting Iowa State this weekend for basketball, and then we're going to pivot back to football. So like I said, kind of all over the place, but you really don't want to miss what's going on in the trenches on the football side of things, so don't go anywhere. All right, let's go ahead and start with the NIL situation. I've got two big, kind of quotes, clips that were talked about from the Brent Bloom going on Three Beards Media that I want to talk about, and I want to talk about how I think it's going to look for the future. That's really where I want to focus here. Brent Bloom talked about, obviously, he was kind of the head of the We Will Collective for a while there. I believe even Matt Campbell talked about Brent Bloom when he decided that he was no longer going to be doing the We Will and the NIL and all of that for Iowa State. So pretty big figure in Iowa State. Honestly, history at this point. Really had a lot of responsibility, and that's, I think, why he stepped away. But during his time as the head of the NIL, he had a couple of very interesting encounters. And when he was dealing with the football side of things, that's the first place I want to start. He talked about how a lot of the players, or not a lot, but certainly some of the players wanted to stick around at Iowa State, but Iowa State just didn't have the money for it. There were guys that were getting offered basically a half to a third of what they were getting last year at Iowa State. Now, I don't know if that's because of the new staff, if that's, partially due to where Iowa State was at buyout wise, paying $4 for Jimmy, getting $2 for Matt. There's a whole lot of behind the scenes stuff that wasn't really gotten into, really wasn't disclosed. I don't have a reason. All I can say is you can't really blame 18 to 22-year-olds for getting or for deciding to leave Iowa State when they're getting offered basically 2 to 3 times more in other places. More than likely, certainly when they're not going to be making as much as they were the year prior at Iowa State. And I do think that that's maybe Iowa State's only downside as far as moving forward, what things look like for the Cyclones. We'll revisit that in a second, but I do have this that I want to offer up, and we'll see how well this holds up in court. Not literally, figuratively here. When he's talking about the collective, which, remember, was much bigger last offseason, there were guys like Deshaun Jackson that were hitting the portal and making a ton of money at other schools just because collectives were kind of trying to dump a bunch of money into players when they still could. Remember when RevShare hit, I believe it was in July, the whole game changed and collectives kind of became obsolete to an extent. Obviously, it is what it is. But there were 3 key players on Iowa State's basketball team, is how it was said. I don't know who it was for sure, but they said no to big money elsewhere, and the collective was kind of forced to come up with $2.5 million in 2 months. The way the story, that's basically word for word what I'll say Mr. Bloom said. He did mention that they had like a fifth of that saved up. Does that mean that they had 500,000 of the 2.5 million, or does that mean that they needed another 2.5 million? I don't know exactly. Doesn't really matter, honestly, for the point that I'm trying to make here. Really what I want to focus on, of course, because collectives are kind of no longer really a big factor in this whole thing, is that 3 Iowa State players decided to stick around and take less money. Now, you could make the argument that they loved Ames. There are tons of businesses in Ames. I love the layout of Ames, the roads. There's a ton of upside to living in Ames. Personally, I think it's actually a vacation destination, maybe an unpopular opinion, but it's mine. It's a higher likelihood that that's not the case. I think it's a much higher likelihood that this is a basketball situation. these players enjoy playing for TJ Otzelberger. These players enjoy playing at Iowa State, a school in the Big 12 that is competitive year in and year out and shows results not only in the regular season, but also in the postseason, in the Big 12 tournament, in the NCAA tournament. I think there's something to be said here about even the loyalty aspect to this. Of course, in the NIL era, that's where I'm going to go next. This could become jeopardized as more players come in and come out quickly. You lose a little bit of that loyalty factor. But guys like Taman Lipsey, I think there's an aspect to, if you come in as a freshman, Iowa State has that loyal, I don't know exactly what it's just vibe is kind of the word that's coming to my brain here. But there's an element of staying true to Iowa State. I don't know how strong that is in comparison to playing for one of the best coaches in the country, one of the best environments in the country, one of the best conferences, or the actually best conference. I think that's a much stronger pull. But I also think the way that Otzelberger has built this program up is, and we'll get to where Iowa State is at portal-wise, obviously, in the second segment. These guys like to play for each other year over year. He's built a culture between the guys where you're almost incentivized to stick around, and he's done a very good job of keeping guys. So I think the outlook on Iowa State is actually really positive, especially on the basketball side of things, because you are playing for one of the top teams in the country. Now, you're probably thinking, okay, well, the loyalty side of things and best, coach, team, conference, whatever argument you want to make for basketball doesn't hold up on the football side of things. And that's fair. I can see where somebody would say that, but I'm actually still relatively optimistic about the football side of things. And for one reason, my reason is the collective having to raise those $2.5 million in 2 months. And essentially, I actually have no idea how they did that, considering the situation Iowa State is in, obviously with the athletic department and the university and just kind of where they're at donor-wise. I have no idea how they did that. But they found a way to get those $2.5 million, and then the collective kind of became obsolete, and now Iowa State is in a totally different situation. That transition is what I want to focus on, because we're starting to move into, I believe, an era where there's going to be another shift. We saw what the NCAA had proposed, where athletes are basically going to get 5 years of eligibility. There's no red shirts. There's no nothing. You get one transfer. It's cut and dry. There really is no ifs, ands, or buts about it. I think the NCAA will start to make a few shifts, obviously with the transfer portal, and then also with NIL. And maybe it's not going to be as it won't be a completely level playing field. I don't think Iowa State's going to be sitting around saying, oh, we're in the exact same spot as Texas, or, oh, we're in the exact same spot as Alabama on the football side, excuse me, on the football side of things. I don't think that's the case, but I do think that there is a world in the near future where changes are made and Iowa State isn't at such a disadvantaged position. And I really am saying that based on the changes that have made over the last few years. Remember how big the collective was, and it's really not a thing anymore. I expect big changes to be made in the future as well. So I like where Iowa State is at in this current moment, all of the football hope. On the basketball side of things, the success that Otzelberger has had, the clear intention for him to stay, and then moving forward, I think that if we move to a one transfer system, I think that benefits Iowa State greatly. I really do. And there's one player that it would have directly impacted for this season. Of course, Iowa State's getting busy in the portal, and we're going to talk about that. But there's also a guy hitting the portal for Iowa State. Cannot believe this. We'll talk about that coming up here in just a second. But first, a word from our friends over at Mazda. This is Moving the Game Forward by Mazda. For those who know, the score never tells the whole story. For Iowa State, really it came down to, for me, Milan Momcilovic, Taman Lipsey. I mean, it's never just about the score. These two guys, especially Taman and Milan. Taman being from Ames, being an Iowa kid, an Iowa State fan, all of the work, the sweat, the tears, the blood he put into becoming the best basketball player he could, and honestly taking Iowa State to new heights. Milan, where he went over the last 4 years, starting out as a freshman, and the development, not only over the last 3 years, but specifically over the last year. There are more to these players than just the highlights. The early mornings, the late night runs, constantly showing up for their squad on and off the court. It doesn't just happen by accident. So the all-new Mazda CX-5 moves the same way. with more space to connect, a bold new design, and more intuitive technology so you can stay connected to the road every position you play. The all-new Mazda CX-5, more to move every side of you. Today's episode is also brought to you by our friends over at TurboTax. It's tax time, but for a lot of us, the old way of doing taxes is a lot. Trying to book an appointment that's not the most convenient, sitting in a waiting room with a stack of papers, emailing back and forth, and wondering if they really get your situation. But this year, you're getting a major upgrade. Intuit TurboTax now has in-person locations nationwide, so you can meet face-to-face with a real tax expert, and your documents get uploaded straight to your TurboTax app on the spot. And just like that, you're done. Your TurboTax expert works to get you every dollar you deserve while you get real-time notifications as you go about your day. It's the relief of walking in and meeting a real person and walking out knowing your taxes are being handled right. Head to TurboTax.com/local to find a store near you and book your appointment. Iowa State on the basketball side of things is getting busy in the transfer portal. Obviously, we're kind of in the middle of that. I'm going to get into a few names that are going to be visiting Iowa State this weekend, a new player that hit the portal that actually genuinely shocked me. But first, I want to thank you for making this your first watch or listen of the day. I could not do this without you. And I want to remind you, you can get Locked On Cyclones ad-free with the Everydayer Club, plus members-only Discord access. Join at lockedoncyclones.supercast.com, or the link is in the show notes or description down below. I've got a list of players that are going to be visiting Iowa State this weekend that I want to get to. But first, I cannot believe this. Mason Williams is hitting the portal. This shocked me. I couldn't think of a good reason for why this is happening. This is one of the players that I was excited about for next season. Obviously got hurt, I believe it was last summer, and so never got to play, I would say, a snap or a down, but I don't know what it is for basketball. What, a dribble? Never got to play a quarter. Never got to play a timeout length, 4 minutes, whatever. I don't know what the time segment would be, but did not get to play at all for Iowa State. And I was genuinely pretty excited about Mason Williams. I watched the tape. It looked good, but I have nothing else to say. I mean, I can't even say how much Iowa State would have missed him because he didn't play, right? Like, it's all hypothetical. So we wish Mason Williams the best. Just shocking more than anything else. I was not necessarily planning or hoping on his contribution next year, just because we didn't know what it was going to be, but it was certainly something that I had on the front of my mind. All right, let's talk about the players that are going to be visiting Iowa State this weekend. We have, let's see here. I'll name the schools first. I don't want to give away too much, but we have a guy from Bradley, Northwestern, Robert Morris, Northern Iowa, and Kansas State. I'll start with Trey Singleton because we have already talked about Trey Singleton, the forward from Northwestern, standing a pretty staggering 6'8" at 215 pounds. Really quick, my favorite thing about Singleton is his ability in transition to get downhill, get to the hoop. He can finish strong. This season, he averaged 7.6 points a game, 4.8 rebounds, and 1.5 assists. I think as a freshman, there's a ton of room for growth here, and doing it under TJ Otzelberger, I think, is a really smart move for him. And I think Iowa State can absolutely use a guy like this, obviously, with guys like Eric Mulder and Joshua Jefferson leaving the program, right? I think this could be a huge pickup for Iowa State. Let's go ahead and move to, we'll go Ryan Prather Jr. from Robert Morris, standing a 6'5", 205 pounds. This last season for the Colonials, I don't know what it is. I actually don't hardly know how to read. Averaged 15.7 points, 3.9 rebounds, 3.6 assists, and shot 44%. Really solid play from Prather based on what I've seen. I honestly didn't have a ton of concerns based on this last season. At 6'5", I think that's good enough size for Iowa State. I would like to see Iowa State target a little bit more size moving forward, which is why I'm a little bit nervous about this next player, but it's not the end of the world. Jaquan Johnson, guard from Bradley in the MVC, is standing at 5'11", 195 pounds based on ESPN. Is from Wisconsin, so there's that. But I don't know if I love the short guard play for Iowa State here. Nonetheless, he did average 16.9 points, so nearly 17 points in the MVC, 3.9 rebounds, 3.6 assists on just over 40% shooting, 42.3. Not too bad. I mean, not too bad. Against UNI, he did have 9 points, a rebound, and 5 assists to 1 turnover. That would be one place where I think if you're going to be 5'11", you're going to probably be a little bit more of a playmaker or creating opportunities for other players this season. Assist to turnover ratio is 3.6 to 1.4, so a little better than a 2 to 1. Solid. Not super impressive, but I think that's really solid. I think we're used to Taman Lipsy, so you got to take that with a grain of salt. Let's move on to another power 4 player, Taj Manning from Kansas State, a 6'7". That's the kind of height that I'm looking for. Forward from Kansas State. Kansas State just has not been good in basketball ever since their run a few years ago. It was the Elite Eight that they went to. This season averaged not nearly as impressive, but 4 points, 5 rebounds, and an assist. I'm rounding within a tenth or two there. Did shoot 48% on the season, so I feel like that's pretty solid. Started 17 games this year, played in 30, an average of 20 minutes. Don't ever really know exactly what you're getting, but I think Otzelberger could use this, especially as a depth piece. I think this is a really solid pickup. And then finally, the last visitor this weekend is Leon Bond III, coming from UNI, as I just mentioned, Jaquan Johnson playing UNI, a player that some of you may be familiar with. 6'5", 200 pounds this last year in the MVC, averaged nearly 12 points per game, 4.7 rebounds, 1.5 assists on 47.3% field goal percentage. Free throws is an area where I think Otzelberger either needs to focus or work on over the offseason. That being said, this group of 5 is relatively solid. I'm not going to say that this is going to knock my socks off. And it's the first weekend, it's whatever. But the way I view the first weekend is probably where you're grabbing the strongest guys. Could be wrong. You can always find a diamond in the rough down the road. But I would assume this is where you're bringing in your 5-ish strongest players, the ones you're most excited about in the portal. I'm not necessarily blown away with this group of players. I'm just going to be completely candid with you. I'm not going to lie and say like, oh my gosh, these guys are incredible. They're good. They're good. I'm probably more excited about Iowa State's freshman class. And I truly do think with the players returning from this last season, Iowa State doesn't need a 10 out of 10 incredible portal class. I think they could probably get by with just a relatively solid class. And honestly, that's what these 5 guys look like to me. Now, I could be wrong, and you never know. Maybe Leon Bond III is, an all-American Big 12 Conference Player of the Year next year. Like, that's entirely possible. I'm not trying to put anybody down here. I'm just saying I think the way that this roster is constructed, you don't have to go out and spend a ton of money bringing big-time players. It kind of seems like that's what Otzelberger is doing here, targeting guys from the MVC, Robert Morris, obviously a couple of big, power 4 players in Northwestern and Kansas State, Taj Manning and Trey Singleton. Like, there is a little bit of that there, but I think this was honestly an opportunity, or the angle here, I think, is that Otzelberger is trying to save a little bit. I don't know how that works out. I don't know what any of the money looks like, but I do know that I think, or at least for myself, money is always on the front of mind when it comes to the transfer portal, and I assume that it's the same for Otzelberger. We'll see how these guys pan out. We'll see which ones decide to stay at Iowa State, and at that point, I'll probably do a deeper dive into what they can offer for the team. But for right now, that's kind of the direction that Iowa State looks to be headed in. Generally speaking, relatively tall guys, a good thing. We'll see if Jaquan Johnson could pan out. I'm not going to do a whole deep dive until he decides he's going to play for Iowa State, though. That being said, let's pivot back over to football. We've kind of been all over the place. We're going to finish strong today talking about Iowa State offensive line, defensive line, in the trenches, kind of where this team has been built. Don't go anywhere. Coming up right here after this. But first, today's episode is brought to you by our friends over at Indeed. Workplace chaos, deadlines that's stacking up, inbox overflowing, and the one position you have to fill still sitting open. When the pressure's on and you need the right hire, this is a job for Sponsored Jobs. Indeed Sponsored Jobs helps you reach the people who actually fit what you're looking for. Skills, experience, location, so you're not just hoping the right candidate stumbles across your post. And here's a stat that says it all. In the minute that I've been talking to you, companies like yours made 27 hires on Indeed, according to Indeed data worldwide. So if you're hiring, spend less time searching and more time interviewing candidates who check all your boxes with Indeed sponsored jobs. Spend less time searching and more time actually interviewing candidates who check all your boxes. Less stress, less time, more results. When you need the right person to cut through the chaos, that's a job for Indeed sponsored jobs. And listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to help get your job the premium status it deserves at Indeed.com/podcast. Just go to Indeed.com/podcast right now and support our show by saying you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply. Need a hire? This is a job for Indeed sponsored jobs. All right, Iowa State was kind of in this last transfer portal cycle built directly around the offensive and defensive lines. Offensive line coach Jake Thornton and defensive line coach Jalen Bibbs both had some media availability this last week and talked a little bit about what we can kind of expect, what they've seen so far through spring training. And I think it's really exciting, at least what the future could look like for Iowa State, because the way that Iowa State chose to attack the portal, if you remember correctly, was entirely through the trenches. I mean, there was the amount of offensive linemen, the amount of defensive linemen in comparison to other position groups, it was pretty clear. Like, they were trying to build their team from the ground up, from the inside out. And I do think that's probably one of the smartest moves, especially when you consider that's where I think Iowa State will have the biggest probably advantage moving forward, right? Especially considering Jimmy Rogers from the Midwest, his familiarity obviously at SDSU, has kind of recruited guys from this area, knows kind of what to say, knows coaches, knows who to interact with. And if you can put really good tape up year one in the line, offensive or defensive line, you can use that moving forward. This is what we're going to do with you or with whatever player or whatever. This is kind of what we're able to turn you into. You can use that as leverage and bring guys who might not be inside of Iowa State's price range, is maybe not a great way to say it, but a way to say it, and get them to stay at Iowa State because of the developmental piece or of the showcase piece. And I think targeting the offensive and defensive lines this season was a smart play, especially for the future. Now, let's go ahead and start with the offensive line. I do think is an area where Iowa State can win a lot of games. From Thornton, who I am excited about. I don't know if everybody's excited necessarily about what Thornton has to offer, but he talked about they want to be the most physical unit on the field every Saturday. And as far as how this group is doing right now, he's saying that you don't have to push them. You kind of have to actually pull them back a little bit. And that's really exciting. I would rather have an offensive line that's too eager, right? Chomping at the bit, as opposed to dragging their cleats out there every single day, not loving the concept of having to smack heads every single day. Like, you want a guy who's super enthused about that. That just seems like just super basic protocol at this point. But when when they were talking about kind of offensive line versus defensive line, a quote stood out to me. Like, there is no buddy once that ball is snapped from Bibbs. This concept that the offensive line and the defensive line, if you think back to high school, there were definitely moments. It was in football for sure. Sometimes in wrestling too, I remember where it'd be like, all right, we're going to just chill. Like, we're going to take this rep off. We're just going to do whatever. Like, that's obviously two-way high school football, much different than playing for Iowa State. But I get the sense that because this team was constructed in the way that it was, everybody is competing for their spot. Nobody's guaranteed anything. Even if you came over from Washington State with basically Jimmy Rogers, you're not guaranteed anything. Like, you need to earn every snap that you will get to play this season. I like that for this offensive and defensive line, because that means not only are they not taking plays off, which is like, that shouldn't really be happening anyway, but not only are they not taking plays off, which leads to them getting better every single snap, but they're also like pushing each other significantly, not just in drills, in that's there. I was going to say 7-on-7. They won't be in 7-on-7, but in those live reps through the spring here and then through the summer, this is where you can really make a big difference, I feel like, especially with so much time to recover before the season. And the fact that they're not just out there kind of, lackadaisically going through the motions does make me feel good. I feel like that should make just about everybody feel good. But the other side of this is, do they hate each other? No, apparently not. They're very close off the field, which I think is a good thing. The argument for that would be the offensive line is not about having the 5 best guys out there. It's about having the 5 guys who gel the most, who have the best communication, who understand what each other are doing. And, I'm sure that if your guard over to your right prefers charcoal or traditional propane grilling, maybe that leads to better blocking schemes. I don't know. That does seem like probably a good sign, though. So, I feel like that's probably a step in the right direction. The biggest thing here is that they are gelling. I think over the spring, so far, what we saw obviously through meetings, but then through this spring training, either we're talking about spring break. Remember just a few weeks ago, like, oh, I'm surprised that they all traveled together. Like that's how close they are. I think the biggest thing that we need to look at here is their iron sharpening iron literally every single day. A couple guys that got thrown out here. Hawk from last season has turned some heads. Bryson Lamb has turned some heads. Caden Crawford out of Iowa Western, a name that I'm extremely excited about. Did play at Iowa, now playing for Iowa State. I think that's going, quick tangent here, I think that's going to add a lot to the Cyhawk rivalry, something that I think is relatively concerning for this specific team because it is compiled in a way where you don't really have a lot of Iowa State guys on the team. You have some, for sure, guys from the Midwest, guys that were on the team last year or 2 years ago. Kyle Conradi, the first name that comes to mind. But you have to assume that this team probably, relatively speaking, cares less than the team from last season. So I think having a few guys like Kyle Conradi and then Caden Crawford are great for keeping that spark and really adding meaning back to the games, because I think we're starting to drift away from that, and it's becoming more like semi-pro. You want it to mean something. You want the rivalry games to really count. And Caden Crawford playing at Iowa Western, playing at Iowa, knows kind of what that's about. And I think that's a great point transition here. There's a lot of these guys that this was brought up in the media availability. There's a lot of these guys that are playing with a chip on their shoulder. They are playing like it's potentially their last play every single play. That's not a direct quote. That's just kind of my deduction here. You're never guaranteed anything. And everyone, it seems like, is excited to get to represent Iowa State. And they were looked over by all of these other places. And now they have a chance to really shine. And they're all competing every single day to get a chance to get on that field to prove themselves. I like where Iowa State is at. Offensive line, defensive line seem to be working, as hard as they should be, I guess. Like, this is spring ball, so you got to take that with a grain of salt. Can't get hurt in spring. You got to do what you got to do. But I like where they're at. I like that this is where this team is built through, because the wide receivers, the quarterbacks, the safeties, all that is great. You can win games, lose games through there. But I do think the offensive line, the defensive line is more important, not only for Iowa State this year, but through the next few years, where if Iowa State is challenged financially, like we brought up in the first segment, that's a place where you're going to have to build through. Like it or not, quarterbacks, wide receivers, top-tier corners, amazing linebackers are going to be expensive. They're going to cost. Defensive linemen, edge players are going to cost you a lot of money. If you can build up a reputation as a university that really builds players, showcases players, and if you kind of make that your identity, I think Iowa State would benefit from that. I think there's a phenomenal group of high school offensive line, defensive linemen in this area of the country, obviously in Iowa specifically, and I like this angle a lot from Jimmy Rogers. That's going to do it for today. Thank you so much for making this your first watch or listen. I appreciate it more than you know. Could not do this without you. Be sure to hit subscribe down below. It's completely free.